The home holds many mysteries, some that I have been able to solve, others that I have yet to solve. For this mystery, we go to the underground. Unlike in the previous episodes, this one doesn't really have any hauntings or ghost stories, but I think that the mystery itself creates enough of a story. In the last episode, I mentioned how Jim and myself were cleaning up and repainting the floors in the attic of the mansion. While doing so, we had to move some boxes that were stacked up in the corner of the main room. Moving the boxes revealed a strange rectangular piece of plywood laying on the floor that looked to be completely out of place. Due to this, we of course picked up the plywood and were presented with a strange sight. Located in the corner was a small, approximately 1 foot by 1 foot hole that dropped straight down to, well, I had no idea where it dropped down to, and neither did Jim, which really surprised me. You see, Jim has been working at the home for over 20 years, actually 21 years as of writing this. When I first started working here, Jim was my guide to getting to know the ins and outs of the home, hence why so many of my stories come from him. But when I tell you this man knows the home like the back of his hand, I mean he can quite literally be blindfolded and told to make it to any room or place inside of the home, and this man will have no issues getting there. It's for this reason that I was honestly shocked when we found this hole in the floor and not even Jim had any idea of what it was, when it got there, or where it goes. So, with the both of us being the type of people to not let anything go unanswered, we brainstormed how we could find some answers. First, we decided to check with our boss and see if there was any mention of it in any records or files, to no avail. Mind you, our boss has also worked at the home since 1998, meaning that he has been there since the year I was born. But since the venture went nowhere, we moved on to my idea. The hole seemed to be quite deep because we dropped a couple of small pieces of broken wall debris down it to see how long it was until we heard the debris hit the bottom. It was also pitch black and our phone's flashlights were practically useless. So in order to try and solve these two parts of the equation, I suggested that we find a good flashlight and tie it off to one end of a 50-foot rope and drop it down and try to see whatever we could see. We scoured our maintenance shop for a suitable flashlight and settled on what just so happened to be the most expensive one, an LED flashlight that was worth more money than I made in one of my paychecks. Anyway, we tied it off to one end of the rope, turned it on, and slowly lowered it down into the hole. As the light was descending, we were able to make out more detail on the walls. The hole maintained the same size, 1 foot by 1 foot, and we noticed the walls were constructed with old red brick. We continued lowering the light and nearly ran out of rope when we finally reached what appeared to be the bottom of the shaft. At the bottom, the small shaft opened up to a wider room, or some sort of place with dirt floors and random pieces of debris like bricks and wood laying around. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything we could see that gave us any idea of where this little room or whatever was. However, Jim then said something that threw me for a loop. He said, "Maybe this shaft leads down to the tunnels." "Tunnels?" I responded. And that's how I first found out about the home's underground history. Jim then explained how in the basement there is a hatch in the floor of one of our storage rooms, which opens up into an underground tunnel system beneath the mansion. Jim had been down there before, but never saw any shafts leading up into the mansion. We made the decision to go down and both give me my first tour of the underground, as well as look and see if we could confirm whether the shaft in the attic connected with the tunnels below. Down in the basement, Jim showed me the hatch, which I must have overlooked numerous times. We moved around some walkers and wheelchairs, opened it up, and jumped down. I turned on my flashlight, and what lay before me blew my mind. There I was, kneeling in a small central pit with tunnels leading out from it, one in my front, one to my left, one to my right, and one directly behind me. Each tunnel was constructed with the old red brick and measured about 3 feet by 3 feet with an arched ceiling. Every so many feet, there would be old wooden supports holding up the aging, dilapidating tunnel system. The tunnels were obviously at least original to the construction of the mansion and seemed to go forever. Unfortunately, by the time I was able to get down there, the tunnel to my right had lost a lot of its wooden supports, so I couldn't explore the tunnel due to its questionable integrity. However, after doing some of my own research and talking with Jim, I do have an idea of what's in that direction. You see, back in 1996, they were doing some work on the mansion and the grounds. While they were digging in the garden in the front of the home, they noticed a hole appear, a small hole that led down to, they had no idea. So they decided to clear some dirt around it, and they ended up finding an opening that led into 2 rooms, 2 cellars of some sort that nobody had known about, at least nobody since the original owners. After investigating it a little bit more, they found that the tunnel on the right had led to the now rediscovered cellars. I will touch on the possible purposes of the tunnels and cellars later, but for now I am going to explain the layout of the remaining tunnels. The tunnel to the left carries on straight for at least 20 feet, with other side tunnels branching off from it. Unfortunately, that end of the tunnel has seen better days itself. You can only go those 20 feet due to what appears to be a collapse, or to be honest, almost a seemingly intentional effort to block off whatever lays beyond in those tunnels. The same goes with the tunnel to the rear. As aggravated as I was by all the collapses and passable tunnels, Jim and myself then ventured down the only remaining passable tunnel. I went first as I had the flashlight and Jim followed behind. I slowly crawled along the dirt floor, breathing in the dusty, stale air as I went. This tunnel is about 50 feet in length, again with the occasional side tunnel branching off, most of which were also blocked by debris. However, once at the end of the tunnel, you come to an intersection with another tunnel running perpendicularly that I will describe as like an uppercase T. In other words, you can choose to go to the left or to the right. I chose the left. Going left takes you a good 10 to 15 feet before you reach another debris pile, unable to go further straight. To the right, though, was a little side tunnel that brings you into a very cramped, not room, but a bigger opening than the tunnel. Inside that not room was a large boulder-like structure with a small vent above it from outside, which appeared to be a source of fresh air for the tunnel system. After taking a photo of this, I uncomfortably turned myself around in this cramped tunnel and made my way back to the central tunnel. Due to the fact that I was on the clock and it was late in the day, I never got to explore the right side of the intersecting tunnel, much to my displeasure. However, from what I could see, it did continue for at least a bit of a distance. One other strange thing about the right side of the tunnel is that about 3 feet down, it had another one of those wooden supports. Only this one was still in good shape, but what was truly unique about it was that it also had a little wooden door on it. Why would there be a door down here, I asked myself. This was one of the reasons that drove me to look deeper into why someone would put tunnels under their mansion and what purpose they might serve other than to just confuse the hell out of some 20-something-year-old who dabbles in historical research and just so happens to work at the converted mansion/nursing home 150 years in the future. As soon as I got home from work that day, I jumped on my computer and got into researching and looking for possible answers. Just as a side note, before I get into sharing what I found, I feel it necessary to once again say that I'm not a professional historian, and I don't claim to be. I do enjoy doing research into historical topics, and in this case, creating content that shares those historical stories. I do my best to find as many facts to support and share those stories accurately as how they played out in history. But sometimes those facts and documentation are far and few between on some topics, as is the case with this one. So, with all that being said, in this next portion, where I share the possible reasons and uses for the tunnels under the home, I cannot completely confirm any of them are historical fact or fiction, but I can confirm that they are the result of strong circumstantial evidence provided by historical fact. I am going to present all of the possible uses, and then leave it up to you to decide which stories may be fact and which may be fiction. The first possible reason for the tunnels: connection to the Underground Railroad of the 19th century, before, during, and after the Civil War. You might remember in the first episode where I talk a little bit about the original owner of the home, Mr. L. To recap a little bit and describe his history a little bit more in depth, Mr. L lived quite a successful and fulfilling life. At the age of 12, he dropped out of school, which was not completely uncommon at the time, but he continued his own education by reading any and all books that he could get his hands on. This continued through his entire life, and there were some accounts of librarians not knowing which books to recommend to him because he had already read most of them. An intelligent man as he was, he moved to New York City in 1835 and became a junior partner in a law firm. After a very successful short career in his law office and dabbling in the stock markets on Wall Street, Mr. L decided to leave the city life behind in 1840 in pursuit of a peaceful life in retirement out in the country of northwest New Jersey. At that time, the area he settled in was nothing more than a village with a few farms and a couple of mills and industrial sites erected along the banks of a newly constructed canal. This canal, which ran from the Delaware River on the west side of New Jersey to the Hudson Bay in the east, was constructed with the main purpose of connecting industries in Pennsylvania to the markets, ports, and industrial sites of the large cities located to the east, such as Paterson, Newark, Jersey City, and New York City. A result of this new canal was that one of the commodities now coming from Pennsylvania was anthracite coal. This coal would actually play a huge role in developing the small local villages and communities that the canal crossed through into the large bustling economic and industrial centers that made them what they are today. You see, the north and specifically northwest of New Jersey is one of the largest, therefore richest deposits of iron ore in the country as well as the world. In order to get all of the impurities out of the iron ore, it needed to be heated up to extremely high temperatures. Obviously, this meant that the iron factories needed to burn coal at as high of temperatures as they could. The coal that they were using before anthracite was most likely a medium quality coal known as bituminous coal. Once the ironworks industry started using the anthracite coal, they found that it was higher quality and was able to burn at higher temperatures, meaning that the resulting iron product had substantially less impurities and therefore was worth a lot more money. This allowed the once smaller iron companies located along the canal to grow and prosper along with the communities around them. It is one of these iron companies that Mr. L would end up becoming a manager of. The company had not been doing so well, and they had talked a retired New York City businessman into taking over in a position of leadership. It was under his leadership that the company would profit the most and created enough economic stability and jobs in the surrounding area that the once small village grew into an economic powerhouse. Mr. L received praise from not only his superiors, but from his workers below him as well. If there wasn't anywhere to go to socialize after a long day's work at the iron foundry, Mr. L would see that a tavern was built. If there wasn't anywhere for kids to be educated, Mr. L would have a schoolhouse erected. If there wasn't sufficient reading materials to satisfy the thirst of knowledge for the citizens, he made sure a public library was built. These were the sentiments that those who were around Mr. L in his life would go on to share about him after he passed away. Mr. L was a highly respected man who was very influential and cared for every person's life, no matter who they were or what they looked like. He would go on to serve in some political positions, such as the first mayor of the town, as well as a delegate from New Jersey sent to the convention in Chicago, in which Abraham Lincoln was nominated for president. He had initially favored Lincoln's counterpart, William H. Seward. However, he would later be convinced that Lincoln was the better nominee, casting his ballot for the now famous president and never losing faith in him throughout his terms. All this being said, Mr. L had many acquaintances in the new town of whom were abolitionists, meaning that they were against the practices of slavery. It is documented the fact that Mr. L was involved in the very secretive Underground Railroad. Exactly how is not well documented, however, his name comes up in numerous studies of the Underground Railroad in New Jersey, and he has ties to other major parties involved as well. The main source of his involvement comes from an article written by Nathan Hopkins in the late 1800s. The bulk of his article is about his father, Charles Hopkins, who was another major abolitionist in the town at the time. Charles fought for the Union Army during the Civil War and survived several years as a prisoner of war. The most important part of this article, though, as it pertains to Mr. L, is where Nathan describes the actions of his father when he was 19 years old, driving escaped slaves hidden within his wagon from station to station in this section of the railroad. Charles would bring his wagon into town later at night under the guise of gathering supplies for the inn that his family ran a few miles out of town. Along with the supplies, he would pick up escaped slaves from the local abolitionists, such as local Dr. Grimes and Mr. L, who had harbored and sheltered them until they were able to move along north and onto freedom. You might be wondering why the escaped slaves had to continue north even though they were in New Jersey, a northern state. Well, New Jersey actually had a considerable portion of its population that were Southern sympathizers. Actually, close to half of them were. Most of this sympathy came due to the fact that the highly industrial cities such as Paterson, Jersey City, and Newark had relied on a lot of their business coming from the southern states. Due to this, the state had partially enacted legislation to make New Jersey a non-sanctuary state, meaning that if an escaped slave was caught in New Jersey, they were to be sent back to the South. Therefore, even in New Jersey, assisting in the Underground Railroad could lead to serious trouble for anyone involved. Yet Mr. L, along with other gentlemen like Charles Hopkins and Dr. Grimes, still did everything they could to help those who were fleeing from the injustices in the South. But back to the tunnels. Does this mean that Mr. L constructed the tunnels underneath his home for the purpose of harboring these escaped slaves? No, at least not definitively. One of the biggest reasons that the Underground Railroad was as successful as it was because of the secrecy involved. Unfortunately, this means that there really isn't much hard factual documentation of how the railroad functioned. A lot of what we know is what is learned from the later writings of those who traveled and helped run it. I'm continuously researching and trying to find more information, but this is all I have as of right now on the possible connection to the Underground Railroad. So, as I continue to find documentation and other sources, I will surely make an update video on this topic in the future. But for now, I'm going to move on with the other possible reasons for the tunnel's existence. Possible reason for the tunnels number 2. Structural integrity and ventilation. I know, I just went on a huge tangent about the Underground Railroad and the possible ties to the mansion. But I would feel dishonest if I didn't share with you all of the possibilities, even the non-glamorous ones. But this one is kind of self-explanatory. As well as the Underground Railroad angle, I also did research into Italianate structures, such as the mansion, to try and see if the tunnels are just a common feature of this architectural style. After scouring the internet for information for days upon days, I unfortunately came up with not much yet again. The only thing I was able to find was a post on a random internet forum from 2007. The writer of this post said that his friend had found tunnels beneath their Italianate-style mansion that matched the description of the tunnels here at the home. About 3 feet by 3 feet with arched ceilings. Unfortunately, he was basically asking the same question as me. Why would the tunnels exist and what purposes did they serve? The only responses were from other people just taking guesses as to the possible purposes. One suggestion was that the intended use would have been to create a lighter foundation which would somehow create more support for the masonry above. Another one was that they could have been made to run pipes through, but the home's tunnels have no pipes running through them, and they have no signs of ever having any types of anchors or anything drilled into them. And the only other suggestion was that it could have been used for ventilation. This one, to me, is the most plausible of the suggestions made in the comments of that forum. The only issues I have with it are 1, why would there be a door in the one tunnel, and 2, why has so much of it been filled in, seemingly deliberately? Again, in this episode, I really don't have any answers. However, I felt like it was a great opportunity to tie in the history surrounding the home, as well as share some interesting stories surrounding it.